Welcome back. You're watching Gravitas. Namrata Randhawa, better known as Nikki Haley, former South Carolina governor and now America's ambassador to the United Nations, is ruling headlines for everything from her sound bites on shoes to the future of Syria. She has been a flinty defender of the Trump line at the United Nations, but she's also distanced herself from his views on Russia. Just what is Nikki Haley up to? Here's a report.
Recall the heat and dust of last year's US presidential election campaign. Recall also Nikki Haley's fierce criticism of Donald Trump.
We will not stop until we fight a man that chooses not to disavow the Ku Klux Klan. That is not a part of our party. That is not who we want as president. We will not allow that in our country.
There's more.
I am an accountant. I can tell you there is no audit that precludes you from showing your tax returns. Donald Trump, show us your tax returns.
A year later, Nikki Haley was in the United Nations after accepting Trump's offer to move there as the US ambassador. She's been a flinty critic of the UN, echoing Trump's views.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, for example, the government is corrupt and preys on its citizens. At the same time, the UN peacekeeping mission is mandated to partner with the government to consolidate peace and security. In other words, the UN is aiding a government that is inflicting predatory behavior against its own people. We should have the decency and common sense to end this.
But she's also been talking tough on Russia.
I think Russia was involved in the election. There's no question about that. And I think when they finish with all of this process, yes, they need to address Russia. They need to act, and they need to make sure they're loud about it. We don't want any country involved in our elections ever. And so once that information comes out, I expect that that will be handled accordingly.
So which view represents the real Nikki Haley? Or is she just another opportunistic politician with an eye on the bigger picture? Bureau Report, WION.
And joining us this evening, Meera Shankar, former ambassador from India to the United States of America, here in the studio. Good evening, Ms. Shankar. And Glenn Carl still with us on the phone line from Massachusetts. What do you make of Nikki Haley?
Well, she was sworn in as governor of South Carolina when I was there as ambassador. Obviously, she has to be a smart politician to be elected governor as a minority and as a woman in a conservative state like South Carolina. And she herself said, you know, I was not white enough to be white and not black enough to be considered black. But she ended with 2 terms as governor. She now can't stand for a 3rd term, and with fairly high approval ratings. So she has been considered, and is still considered, a rising star in the Republican Party, a Tea Party darling, so very much to the right of her party, but not a radical like President Trump. You know, she has far more conventional Republican views on a range of issues, including Russia, including Israel, and so on. And though she has reflected both in her confirmation hearing and in her opening statement at the UN.
Yes. Glenn Carl, she was a Trump baiter, then she was one of his cabinet appointees. Now she comes out and says there is no question that Russia meddled in the American election. Which Nikki Haley is the real Nikki Haley?
Well, that's maybe the toughest question that I've been asked since we've spoken together. She is, as the ambassador very accurately assessed, a talented individual and politician. She also, something of great encouragement for Americans in the whole, I think, is a fact-based individual. And I'm not being facetious here. She doesn't engage in conspiracy theories and simply lie, as the commander-in-chief has so frequently been demonstrated to do. So that gives a lot of hope and faith to many people. So who the real Nikki Haley is, I think she's an ambitious and talented politician who is as well placed as anyone can be right now to pick up the banner of the Republican Party as a female, as an effective debater, someone who has reached out in her acts to minorities. All of these things are very encouraging. And she also offers hope to people who are so distressed by Trump because she does seem to be one of the few adults actually in a position of authority. So I think a real politician, yes, but one who is astute and deals with facts coming from a conservative position is also true.
Veera Shankar, she knows how to use the media. She comes up with these made-for-television one-liners. She goes out of her way to make a splash, as one headline in America put it. She's also an unlikely choice for the posts that she's occupied, not just for her foreign policy credentials, but the criticism for Donald Trump. Why then do you think she was given this job?
Well, I think Mr. Trump was reaching out to, you know, elements within the Republican Party which had opposed him, but were not irreconcilably opposed. There are some who are irreconcilably opposed, and there are others who are not. Nikki Haley had supported Marco Rubio's candidacy, and as a supporter of Marco Rubio, she was critical of President Trump and his stance. Now, I think she took some very interesting decisions when she was governor, and the one which really brought her into the national limelight was the sensitivity with which she handled the aftermath of the shooting in the black church, where she, you know, sought to and passed legislation to remove the Confederate flag from state grounds. Now, you know, the Confederate flag goes back to the Civil War and the anti-slavery stance of the southern states. And it still was a flag which was flying in the South. So this was seen as really, in a sense, putting that history behind and starting the process of healing in the wake of a mass casualty. Interestingly, unlike Bobby Jindal, who was the other governor of Indian origin, and that too again in the South. And it's really surprising because the southern states have been traditionally considered more conscious of issues of race. She was quite proud of her Indian roots and remained connected to the Indian American community. She invited me for her swearing in, so I was there, you know, and it was an unlikely day because it was snowing in South Carolina and the ceremony was outdoors. But she's proved a successful governor. Let's see how she shapes up as an ambassador to the UN. Now, interestingly, on some of the issues, like Russia, where she has criticized Russia's occupation of Ukraine and said that it's illegitimate, and and so on. So of Crimea rather, not Ukraine, and that the sanctions against Russia won't be lifted anytime soon. Now it's quite interesting because this has also helped President Trump, because he has pointed out to this and said, look, my ambassador to the UN has called out Russia, you know, on this issue, both in her confirmation and in her first statement at the UN. So even though her views may be different from that of Trump, the stance may not be something where Trump holds her back, because, and that's what she said,
right.
Because in some sense he's grappling with this whole issue of how much, you know, what kind of contacts his team had with Russia and so on. So if there is somebody who's critical of Russia, I think perhaps it adds, he feels maybe that it adds to his credibility.
Sure. Glenn Carl, I want to read out to you one of the opinion pieces that I read earlier today, an excerpt from there. Haley, 45, was seen as a rising star in the Republican Party before Trump's election. Her ability to navigate the treacherous waters of the Trump administration has renewed speculation about her political future, generating buzz among Republican operatives that she may be Tillerson's heir apparent and a future presidential candidate. Is that a lot of kite flying?
Well, I don't know what the newspaper was that wrote that, but it's one that I think makes good analysis. She is one of the stars. The Republicans are all look like me. They're all middle-aged white men, and much as I admire, my own heritage, that is not what America is. And the Republicans are in a bind that their electoral base is so heavily based on only people with my ethnic background. Haley is a rising star, yeah, and she certainly has demonstrated in her career, and since she has been at the UN, a lot more panache and insight and strength, frankly, than Tillerson, who has been an occasional photo op presence, and that's about it.
Meera Shankar, some say that she's made her political ambitions too obvious, and then this current post is just a box-checking exercise to bolster her resume for a future presidential bid. I want to dwell a little more on your meeting with her. Did she strike you as a very ambitious woman who's...
No, I don't want to use the word very, because whenever it's a woman with political ambition, it's always very. There has to be something negative.
No, I didn't mean it in a negative context.
She is a talented political politician, and one who has ambition. Now, where that takes her, we have to see. If she doesn't perform well at the UN, or she falters in some sense, it will impact her negatively. If she makes a success of it, and in a sense is seen as upholding American values and American positions, American leadership, then I think it will benefit her. But you can never say, because a year, 2 years is a long time in politics, and you saw Hillary Clinton's stint as Secretary of State, where she was the most popular member of the Obama administration. Didn't really, in a sense, add weight to her candidature.
Why do you think she criticized this? She said what she said about the Russia link.
Well, all the intelligence agencies have said that there was Russian meddling in the elections. I mean, that I think several of the intelligence agencies have confirmed that the Russians had hacked the Democratic Party email, and so. But now what they are investigating is, was there any kind of contact between the Trump team and the Russians
but as
to
someone
do
from
this?
the Trump team, there are others on the Trump team. Someone, I think Sean Spicer said that if he uses Russian salad in his food, that's the Russia link. But here you have a U.S. ambassador to the UN saying
I
there's
don't
no
think.
question.
Please let me say that she's not saying that there's a link between the Trump administration and Russia. She is saying there was Russian meddling in the election, which is a different statement, and which basically is going by what the intelligence agencies have said, that there was an attempt by Russia to hack the Democratic Party email, and then those were leaked, and so there was an obvious effort to intervene in the elections. But she has not said that there was any link between the Trump team. So it's a carefully
crafted one.
Carefully, in a sense, nuanced position.
Sure, and she knows how to make headlines. Here's another of my favorite quotes from her. I wear heels, and it's not a fashion statement. It's because if I see something wrong, we're going to kick them every time. That's Nikki Haley for you. Thank you very much. Glenn Carl, Meera Shankar, pleasure having you in the studio. We've discussed Nikki Haley. Now her boss, Donald Trump, is also in the news, this time for saying that he will, quote-unquote, solve North Korea with or without China. Significantly, this comes right after the US-China trade war and right before Xi Jinping's visit to America. North Korea is fast emerging as one of the Trump administration's most pressing security concerns. But is it a problem that Washington can deal with alone? Here's a report.
China and America's frosty relations are being put to the test again. Just days ahead of President Xi Jinping's visit to the US, President Trump has said he'll solve North Korea with or without China. Last month, Trump had said North Korea was behaving very badly and accused China of doing little to resolve the situation. That was followed by a stern warning from his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, who said a military response would be on the table if Pyongyang threatened South Korean and US forces. Despite warnings, North Korea tested a new high-thrust engine rocket, which Kim Jong-un declared successful. North Korea has successfully conducted 5 nuclear tests and 10 missile tests so far. China doesn't believe in cutting off the poverty-stricken country, fearing waves of refugees will flow in its territory if the situation worsens. Washington's constant pressure on Beijing to intervene on North Korea's nuclear interests isn't going well with Chinese leaders. China is irritated with America's decision to base an advanced missile defense system in North Korea. It is also suspicious of the US intentions towards self-rule Taiwan, which China claims its own. Despite differences, the two sides are talking. Trump has been unpredictable, attacking Beijing on trade, the South China Sea dispute, and talking to Taiwan leaders. The statements right before President Xi's visit fall in that pattern. Remains to be seen how China takes the latest googly. Bureau Report, WION.
And joining us for more on this, Einar Thangen, political and economic commentator from Beijing, and Bhaskar Roy, former diplomat, with us from New Delhi. Good evening to both of you. Bhaskar Roy, what do you make of these statements from Team Trump about military action? They say they will go it alone. They can solve North Korea on their own. Is that a possibility?
Good evening, Patki. Well, all of us have been watching Donald Trump and his statements. Will he take the military option? I do not think so, because there are others in this cabinet who are beginning to show him some sense or the other. You know, attacking North Korea, taking out its nuclear and missile establishments is going to completely change. There will be an upheaval in the security scenario in East Asia and Southeast Asia, the Asia-Pacific region. China is not going to just sit by and watch, because North Korea is very important to China. Whether they want to or not, among the Chinese people, the top leadership has taken a stern decision in the last 2 years not to give up North Korea, because North Korea is also a card for the Chinese against Japan and US, and they're going to play that card. If China wanted to squeeze North Korea, they could have done more. Yes, refugee problem, influx from North Korea is one thing if they cut off what you call economic aid. But apart from that, the North Korea's position as a nuclear, emerging as a nuclear and missile power, has been watched very closely from Beijing. And without that, North Korea could not have come so far. But there are two unpredictable people. One is Kim Jong-un on the one side and Donald Trump on the other. So we'll have to measure each of their steps and statements. If that goes through well, we'll have to see some peace, and the six-party nuclear dialogue with North Korea could be revived. But at the moment, one doesn't see any chance of this dialogue reviving very soon, with the kind of statements coming from both sides.
Right. Einar Thangen, Trump's statement comes on the eve of Xi Jinping's visit to Florida. Why make a statement like this just before a meeting? How is Beijing seeing this?
Well, quite frankly, it's kind of par for the course. As this distinguished diplomat said, you can count on Trump to be unpredictable. And this is what he's doing. So I think from China's point of view, Yes, they're trying to gauge U.S. action or inaction, what they may or may not do. Trump has three basic things on the table he can do. One, engagement. He mentioned 3 times during the campaign that he wanted to have a hamburger with Kim Jong-un. I don't know if that would sit very well with the American people. Second, he can take more economic sanctions, although that does not seem a very fruitful thing. So I think everything that's been done has been done to this extent. The third one would be military options, and one would be non-lethal military blockade or some sort of decapitation strike. But the difficulty there is that there's no reason to believe that the North Korean people are in a position to have a popular government. Now, in terms of how China sees North Korea, I think there's a fundamental misreading of the relationship. If, in fact, Beijing was and so infatuated with North Korea and it was such an important card, then I think Xi Jinping would have met young Kim Jong-un. He has not. Met 3 times with the Korean president, who's now in trouble or on her way out. But he never has met with this young man, and he has no intention of doing so. He's also cut off 1/3 of their international trade, 1/3 of their total GDP coming from outside. So I think it's too much to say that the Chinese are hanging on to this relationship. It's an irritant. They do not want to see an expansion of U.S. troops into North Korea. If there is a reunification, I think they would like to see something orderly and something that would make the combined Korea a neutral player in this area.
But the criticism against China, Einar, is that China and North Korea, as we know, are historical allies. Yes, China has taken some steps, but it is wary of going the whole hog because it fears, as Mr. Roy pointed out, the refugee problem, the reunification. China isn't doing as much as it can, although it wants to tell the world that we do not have that kind of leverage with Pyongyang.
Well, what would you propose they do if they cut off all of the aid and the North Korea falls? Is that a victory? Are you willing to see a civil war, a war between different factions battling over who will take control of this country? I mean, refugees flooding out, potential who knows what going on with South Korea. This idea that somehow by forcing an economic situation you will solve it is a little bit naive. I mean, how will this create a better environment? You are now talking about a country that has fledgling nuclear resources. Do you want those?
And is adding to the arsenal, despite all the warnings, despite what Rex Tillerson said, despite what the Defense Secretary said earlier. North Korea is carrying on with these attacks. So either you stand and watch North Korea build more weapons and tests them, or you impose sanctions, which is the better way out?
Well, quite frankly, I don't know that sanctions would do it. China has taken away 1/3 of the currency. I think at this point there needs to be talks. And those talks should probably be the 6-party talks. I don't know how you solve this on a military basis. People keep talking about making the ultimate sacrifice, but what is the end game? We've seen this in the Middle East, where there's been fast action and absolutely no resolution. In fact, situations have gotten worse there. So be careful when you ask for military action. It may not give you the results you're looking for.
All right. Okay, Bhaskar Roy, then are the statements from Donald Trump's administration just grandstanding? And when he says it on the eve of Xi Jinping's visit, is he setting the agenda? Is he going to use trade as a leverage to push China further to act against Pyongyang?
Look at it. You see, he has given a notice to China just before Xi Jinping arrives on trade. He has talked about North Korea. There are several other issues also in the Asia-Pacific security paradigm. But how far that you can push to? You see, if one is standing at the DMZ between North Korea and South Korea demilitarized zone, you could imagine if there was an attack from the North Korean side, what would happen to Seoul? Seoul will be in rubbles. And if North Korea is attacked militarily by Trump, this whole thing is going to come apart. The North Koreans won't keep quiet. That is for sure as long as Kim Jong-un is there. And we don't see any shaking of hands between the two sides. It has to have a different approach. China has stood by and watched as North Korea's missile and nuclear technology grew. China is the only country through which you can reach North Korea. They have either kept a blind eye or quietly allowed the Pakistan-North Korea cooperation both in missile and nuclear issues. And all the things between the two countries used to transit through Beijing, which Beijing was fully aware of. So to that extent, China allowed this to happen. And they have created one standalone almost nuclear power in Pakistan, and this is the other one. So the whole thing will have to be approached in a different manner. And at the moment, pressurizing Xi Jinping is not going to be easy. I think it will be a mistake to do that, because the 19-party Congress is coming in the autumn of this year, and Xi Jinping is going to get more powerful. And therefore, Xi Jinping cannot move back and take a step back from his positions and accommodate Donald Trump. It will be weakness, and he'll be attacked within his own party in the country. So approach has to be found in a different manner, not muscle flexing and threatening. Yes, those kind of rhetorics will continue and things like that, as long as you don't do anything seriously.
Right, there's pressure on Donald Trump as well, with bipartisan support in Washington for tougher financial sanctions.
What kind of an endgame one is going to do?
Right, against Pyongyang. Bhaskar Roy and Einar Tangan, thanks very much for joining us. Appreciate you joining us here on Gravitas. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll bring you a very inspiring story from Pakistan. Stay with us.